Frank Stillwell was more than an outlaw. He was the one man who pushed Wyatt Earp to the edge. His actions, influence, and violent reputation made him the deadliest opponent Earp ever faced. And his story shows how unstable and dangerous the Old West truly was. Number 1. Stillwell's background and early activities. Frank Stillwell's rise in the American Old West came from his ability to operate in two worlds at the same time: the world of official law enforcement and the world of criminal activity. Born in Iowa in 1856, Stillwell moved west as a young man, entering a region where institutions were weak, frontier justice dominated daily life, and personal violence was common. In this environment, reputation mattered more than paperwork, and Stillwell quickly learned how to use the system to his advantage. His early employment shows how flexible and opportunistic he was. Stillwell worked briefly as a soldier during the Indian Wars, then shifted into civilian jobs such as freight driving and teamster work. These jobs put him in contact with ranchers, railroad companies, miners, and small settlements groups that often struggled with theft, disputes over land, and transportation problems. By the time he settled in Arizona territory, he had gained a broad understanding of how frontier commerce functioned and where its weak points were. That knowledge made him useful to both sides of the law. In Pima County, he served as a deputy sheriff, a position that gave him access to local records, criminal investigations, and enforcement networks. But at the same time, many residents suspected him of participating in cattle theft, stagecoach robberies, and protection schemes. The Old West did not have modern investigative tools, so crimes were often solved through reputation rather than physical evidence. This allowed Stillwell to remain under suspicion without ever facing a solid conviction. His connection to the Cowboys, a loosely organized group of rustlers and cross-border criminals, placed him directly against the Earps. The Cowboys controlled cattle routes, smuggling operations, and social influence in southern Arizona. Their activities threatened the growth of towns like Tombstone, which depended on stable law enforcement to support mining and business investment. While some cowboys acted recklessly and openly, Stillwell operated more strategically. He served as a communicator, a scout, and sometimes a negotiator between outlaws and officials who preferred to avoid conflict. He understood how to pressure local businesses and influence political figures, and this made him far more dangerous than the typical frontier outlaw. Tension grew as the Earps arrived in Tombstone and pushed for structured law enforcement. Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan Earp believed the territory needed order, and that outlaw groups must be restrained. Stillwell represented the opposite, a frontier mindset where force, intimidation, and informal alliances controlled territory. The growing clash between those two visions created the foundation for a conflict that would become one of the most violent periods in Tombstone's history. The disputes surrounding Stillwell in the early 1880s included cattle ownership conflicts, railroad sabotage allegations, and involvement in threatening local settlers. While not all accusations were proven, the sheer volume reflected how much influence he had gained and how much disruption followed him. His unpredictability, combined with his political connections, made him a serious opponent to any lawman attempting to establish stability in the region. Long before his final confrontation with Wyatt Earp, Stillwell had already become a central figure in the ongoing conflict for control of Arizona territory. Number 2. Escalating conflict with the Earps. The conflict between Frank Stillwell and the Earps did not appear overnight. It developed through years of investigations, territorial disputes, and mounting hostility between organized outlaw groups and the forces trying to limit their influence. The Earps, acting as lawmen and political figures, repeatedly clashed with cattle rustlers, stage robbers, and smugglers operating under the loose Cowboy network. Stillwell became one of the Cowboys' key members, partly because he had a unique ability to operate within legal structures while also coordinating criminal activity. The gunfight at the OK Corral in October 1881 intensified existing tensions and split Tombstone into two competing camps. On one side were citizens who believed in strengthening law enforcement to protect business and mining interests. On the other side were ranchers, cowboys, and local politicians who viewed the Earps as outsiders using the badge for personal power. Although Stillwell was not physically present at the OK Corral, he immediately positioned himself as a supporter of Ike Clanton and the Cowboy faction. His public comments and his movements around town made it clear that he opposed the Earps and supported efforts to retaliate. Eyewitness reports from late 1881 described Stillwell spending increased time near places the Earps frequented: businesses, homes, and stables. Some witnesses claimed he followed Wyatt and Virgil on multiple occasions, while others reported hearing him threaten that the Earps would face consequences for the OK Corral incident. In an environment where many disputes were settled through ambushes, these reports were taken seriously. Additionally, Stillwell was repeatedly accused of interfering with Southern Pacific Railroad operations, an issue that posed economic risks for Tombstone and nearby towns. Railroad officials alleged that he intimidated workers and tampered with shipments, especially livestock being transported across the territory. Such actions fit a pattern of using force or fear to influence local commerce. For the Earps, this meant Stillwell was not just a criminal, he was an operational threat to economic stability, community safety, and political order. After the OK Corral hearings, tensions only worsened. The Cowboys filed charges against the Earps, and the Earps fought to defend themselves legally. During this period, Stillwell worked behind the scenes to strengthen Cowboy unity, spread rumors that painted the Earps as corrupt, and position himself as an influential voice within the anti-Earp faction. His actions contributed directly to rising fear among residents, many of whom no longer trusted the legal system to stay neutral or enforce the law consistently. Stillwell's involvement was not merely symbolic. He acted as a coordinator, helping the Cowboys respond strategically to the Earps' law enforcement activities. This included identifying patrol routes, sharing information about Earp movements, and advising Cowboy members on when to avoid town or when to escalate pressure. When combined with his violent reputation, these actions made Stillwell one of the most destabilizing forces in the region. By early 1882, Tombstone was trapped in a cycle of threats, intimidation, and targeted violence, and Stillwell's name appeared in almost every major report or rumor concerning Cowboy retaliation. His growing influence pushed the conflict into a dangerous stage that would soon erupt into open violence. Number 3. The murder of Morgan Earp and serious accusations. The turning point in the feud came on March 18, 1882, when Morgan Earp was assassinated while playing billiards in a Tombstone saloon. A hidden gunman fired through the window, killing Morgan instantly and nearly hitting Wyatt. The attack shocked the community and exposed how deeply the conflict had escalated. It was no longer about political control or legal disputes, it had become a deadly campaign. Although investigators found no definitive evidence linking Stillwell to the assassination, he immediately became one of the primary suspects. Several factors contributed to this suspicion. First, Stillwell had recently been seen in the company of known Cowboy members believed to have held grudges against the Earps. Second, multiple witnesses reported hearing Stillwell make comments implying he expected violent retaliation against the Earps following the OK Corral events. Third, in the chaotic days after the shooting, Stillwell appeared near locations associated with the Earp family, raising concerns that he was monitoring their movements. Witness testimony from various citizens placed Stillwell in conversations with men suspected of planning the attack. While these statements were not legally actionable, they reinforced Wyatt Earp's belief that Stillwell had either participated in the killing or helped plan it. Given Stillwell's pattern of aligning with the most aggressive Cowboys, Wyatt considered him a direct threat to the safety of the remaining Earp family members. The murder of Morgan Earp changed Wyatt's approach entirely. The Earps had spent months relying on the court system, filing charges, attending hearings, and attempting to operate through formal legal channels. Morgan's assassination convinced Wyatt that the territorial justice system had failed. Local authorities, many of whom had connections to Cowboy supporters, were unable or unwilling to prosecute the suspects. This breakdown of law and order pushed Wyatt toward a more direct and personal response. In the days following Morgan's death, Stillwell was reported near the Tucson train station and the surrounding rail yards. Virgil Earp, who had been badly wounded months earlier, was being escorted out of Arizona for his safety. Seeing Stillwell in the area raised immediate fears that another ambush was being prepared. Some witnesses claimed Stillwell was armed, others said he was searching for specific individuals, and still others believed he was coordinating with additional cowboys. To Wyatt, these sightings confirmed that the threat was ongoing. If Stillwell was indeed planning to attack Virgil, it meant the conflict had escalated from political rivalry into targeted family destruction. Wyatt interpreted the situation as an imminent danger that required action, and this belief set the stage for the deadly confrontation that would follow at the Tucson station. Number 4. The Tucson train station confrontation. The confrontation at the Tucson train station on March 20th, 1882 became one of the defining moments of the Earp-Cowboy conflict and a turning point in the history of law enforcement in the American Old West. Wyatt Earp, determined to protect his wounded brother Virgil and the remaining family members, agreed to escort Virgil and his wife to the Southern Pacific Railroad depot so they could leave Arizona territory. Virgil had been severely injured in a previous ambush, and keeping him in Tombstone was no longer safe. The Earps knew that cowboy retaliation remained a strong possibility, especially from individuals who viewed the Earps as the main obstacle to their operations. The station environment provided several tactical advantages for an ambush. Lighting around the depot was minimal, which created long shadows and several blind spots where a gunman could hide without being noticed. Security was also limited. Railroad personnel often avoided intervening in conflicts involving known outlaws, and travelers were left to protect themselves. Wyatt understood these vulnerabilities, so he and his associates stayed alert and armed while waiting for the train to depart. According to sworn statements and multiple later testimonies, members of the Earp party soon noticed figures moving near the edges of the platform. The shapes were difficult to identify, but as the men came closer, it became clear they were cowboys, and Frank Stillwell was among them. Stillwell's presence was alarming for the Earps, given his suspected involvement in Morgan Earp's murder and earlier threats against Virgil. Wyoming newspapers later reported that Stillwell had been seen in Tucson earlier that same day, circulating around the depot as if scouting for an opportunity. This raised the possibility that the cowboys planned to attack Virgil during his transfer out of the territory. When the cowboys approached the train and began to close in on the platform, Wyatt and his group moved into action. They pursued Stillwell, who separated from the others and attempted to escape towards the rail cars. Several shots were fired in the dark. Later accounts differ on the exact sequence of events, but all agree that Stillwell fell under close-range fire from Wyatt Earp. His body was found near the tracks with extensive shotgun wounds, consistent with the weapons carried by the Earp party. When territorial officials arrived, they documented multiple injuries on Stillwell's body and noted that he had been hit with overwhelming force. A coroner's inquest confirmed the identity of the body and the nature of the wounds. In response, warrants were issued for the arrest of Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, and other members of the party. But by the time these warrants became official, the Earps had already left Tucson, starting what would become the Earp Vendetta Ride. The killing sparked an immediate political and legal crisis. Supporters of the Cowboys claimed that Stillwell had been assassinated without trial, and that Wyatt had bypassed the legal system entirely. On the other side, Earp supporters argued that the Cowboys had already demonstrated their disregard for the law, and that Wyatt acted to prevent another targeted attack against Virgil. Public opinion in Arizona split sharply along political and economic lines, and regional newspapers responded with dramatically different interpretations. The incident demonstrated how deeply the conflict had eroded trust in formal law enforcement structures. When courts were viewed as ineffective, individuals often took justice into their own hands, and the Tucson shooting became a clear example of this pattern. The confrontation made one thing undeniable. Violence had replaced legal authority in the region. The death of Stillwell represented the collapse of negotiations, court hearings, and political balancing. From this point forward, the conflict would be settled not by judges or officials, but by armed pursuit. Wyatt's decision to act decisively at the depot showed his belief that the territory's legal institutions were no longer capable of controlling the outlaws who threatened his family. And whether justified or not, this event fundamentally changed the course of the Earp-Cowboy conflict. Number 5. Why Stillwell was considered Wyatt Earp's most dangerous opponent. Frank Stillwell's reputation as the deadliest gunman Wyatt Earp ever faced was not based solely on his skill with weapons. Many outlaws of the period were capable shooters. What set Stillwell apart was the combination of criminal versatility, political influence, unpredictability, and access to sensitive information due to his previous law enforcement roles. He understood how legal systems operated in frontier communities, and he used that understanding to exploit weaknesses. His early involvement in cattle theft and stagecoach robberies gave him detailed knowledge of transportation routes, natural escape paths, and regional geography knowledge that was incredibly valuable for organizing or supporting outlaw activity. Many cowboys relied on him for strategic information. His connections spread across southern Arizona, northern Mexico, and various border settlements. These networks enabled him to gather intelligence, avoid arrests, and coordinate with individuals who had their own reasons for opposing the Earps. Stillwell also had a reputation for intimidation. Numerous witnesses refused to testify against him because they feared retribution. This lack of cooperation allowed him to evade prosecution repeatedly. Local officials relied heavily on public testimony to build cases, and without it, the legal system struggled to function. Stillwell understood this and used it to maintain influence while avoiding legal consequences. Another factor that made him particularly dangerous was his willingness to confront the Earps directly. He appeared near their businesses and homes, followed their travel routes, and associated with individuals known for making threats. These actions created constant pressure and forced the Earps to increase their own security. While many cowboys preferred to remain in the background and strike indirectly, Stillwell had no problem placing himself at the center of conflict. This elevated him from a general outlaw threat to a personal adversary. His suspected involvement in the assassination of Morgan Earp amplified his danger level significantly. Even though no court formally charged Stillwell, the circumstantial evidence, his presence with cowboy suspects, his earlier threats, his behavior in the aftermath, made him the most likely target in Wyatt's eyes. From Wyatt's point of view, Stillwell had both motivation and opportunity to continue attacks against the Earp family. Allowing him to remain free meant accepting a long-term risk. Historians often point out that Stillwell's influence extended beyond violence. His ability to manipulate political relationships within Arizona territory made him resistant to traditional policing. He maintained contact with officials sympathetic to the cowboys, which helped him avoid warrants, delay hearings, or gain access to inside information. This made him one of the few outlaws who posed not just a physical threat, but a structural one. He represented a breakdown in territorial justice, showing how corruption and violent networks could undermine early law enforcement efforts in the Old West. For Wyatt Earp, these factors created a sense of urgency. Stillwell was not simply an outlaw to arrest. He was a destabilizing force who had already played a role in one family murder and was believed to be preparing for another. Seen through this lens, Stillwell became the most dangerous opponent Wyatt ever encountered. Number 6. Historical impact and legacy. The killing of Frank Stillwell had long-lasting consequences that extended far beyond Tucson or the Earp family. His death ignited the Earp Vendetta Ride, a controversial and widely debated series of armed confrontations in which Wyatt targeted individuals believed to be involved in Morgan's assassination. This campaign contributed to the collapse of organized outlaw activity in southern Arizona and marked the beginning of the end for the Cowboy network. Stillwell's life also provided a valuable case study on the blurred boundaries between lawman and outlaw in frontier America. His time as a deputy sheriff revealed how easily individuals could move between enforcing the law and violating it. This dual identity made it difficult for communities to trust local institutions. In many cases, citizens did not know whether a badge represented justice, corruption, or personal ambition. Stillwell embodied this ambiguity, and his actions reinforced widespread concerns about the reliability of frontier law enforcement. In academic research, Stillwell is frequently cited as an example of how economic opportunity and weak legal structures encouraged violent behavior. The mining boom in Tombstone attracted wealth and outsiders, but also increased competition, political tension, and criminal influence. Individuals like Stillwell thrived in these conditions because they understood how to use violence, fear, and political alliances to gain power. His conflict with the Earps demonstrated how rapidly these internal pressures could collapse into violence when competing visions for territorial control collided. Wyatt Earp's confrontation with Stillwell became a symbol in American historical memory. Supporters viewed it as a necessary act in the face of unchecked outlaw aggression. Critics saw it as a violation of due process. Regardless of interpretation, the event clearly illustrated the limitations of legal authority in frontier conditions. Lawmen sometimes acted outside formal systems, not because they wanted to, but because they believed they had no other option. The legacy of Stillwell's death shaped later portrayals of frontier justice in books, films, and academic studies. It highlighted the extreme circumstances that drove individuals like Wyatt Earp to take decisive and violent action. It also revealed how outlaws could gain influence not only through crime, but through political manipulation and intimidation. Today, Frank Stillwell remains an important figure in Old West history, precisely because he represented the complexities and contradictions of the era. His life and death showed that the American frontier was not simply a battle between law and lawlessness, but a struggle over who controlled territory, resources, and the meaning of justice in a rapidly changing world.